Hello, my name is Jacob Monk. Welcome to a short video about the subject, Am I a Viking? Well, you'll have to tell me. I'm not going to tell you because, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure. First of all, I'm a Dane. I'm living here in Copenhagen, Denmark. And during the Viking Age, from around year 800 until around year 1066, most of the Vikings, they lived in Norway or Denmark. And as a matter of fact, no one really had any claim that there was a difference between the Vikings coming from Norway and Denmark. Actually, soon later, Norway was considered a part of Denmark, and it continued that way up until 1814. So what comes from Norway during the Viking Age is coming from Denmark too. And my family has its roots. One of its roots, we have many roots, but one of the roots is coming from Norway. That is the reason for my name, Monk. There is a famous Norwegian painter called Munch, and it is a Norwegian name. But I'm born and raised here in Denmark, and I'm very interested in history, so I used quite a lot of time when I am asked to meditate, to think about the question, am I a Viking? And the other day I had a group of 12 people. I had the joy of showing them round on the National Museum in Denmark. Well, the National Museum is placed here in Copenhagen, and on ground floor it is all about the old age and especially the Viking Age in Denmark and Scandinavia. And these people, they had a lot of questions, and that made me think a lot. What is a Viking? Am I a Viking? Can you be a Viking year 2019? Or is it only people from the past, from 1,000 years ago, that can be called Vikings? And if we are called Vikings today, then what is the meaning of this word? Is it to be understood as pirates, as terrorists, as killers, invaders, or is it to be understood as peaceful farmers, sailors, fishermen, and family fathers and mothers? Because the fact is that most of the Vikings, they didn't travel abroad. They didn't kill anyone. They didn't try to conquer foreign countries. They didn't try to invade England or Byzantium, called Russia today, or Spain, or Baghdad, or any other place in the world. Most of the Vikings, they lived at home as peaceful working people. But of course, this was a time where there was no state. Denmark was not a united state. We didn't have one single king that could unite us. During the Viking Age, there were around 20 different kings, and these kings, they fought against each other. So every man during the Viking Age needs to have some kind of military training in defending himself and his family, training to fight and to use the weapons of fighting, that is shields, swords, bows, knives, and everything what you need to defend yourself in a time of iron, because iron was invented during the Viking Age. That is why the weapons of the Vikings, they were quite effective. And for example, when Erik the Red and his son, they came from Greenland and they went to northern America, what is today called Boston. This place, I wouldn't say they conquered it, but they came there and tried to make some kind of colony. But unfortunately, they were driven away by the Indians, so the native people of America. Maybe you would think that could not be possible, but it was possible. Although the Vikings had much better weapons than the native people of America. The natives, they outnumbered the Vikings so much that actually Erik the Red and his followers, they had to flew away and travel back to Greenland, where they survived up until around 200 years after they arrived there. Of course, not Erik the Red himself, he died, but his followers and other people from this colony, they stayed there for 200 years. And still today you can find the ruins of a Christian Catholic church in that place in Greenland. Because in the end of the Viking Age, the Vikings turned Christian. And this is the question I have to consider when I think, should I be called a Viking? Yes or no? Well, the argument for me accepting to be called a Viking is that I think the Vikings, they traveled a lot. Some of them did. And I like to travel too, okay? I think the Vikings, they tried to defend themselves against other tribes, other nations, other religions. And maybe I would think that is a wise thing to do also today. And most of the Vikings, they were hard-working people in agriculture and fishing industry. Of course, fishing was not an industry during the Viking Age, but they had a huge amount of fishing going on. And still today, you can hear some words in the Danish language coming from the Viking Age. For example, if a young man in Denmark, he looks at a beautiful girl, he will say in Danish, "Hun en lækker sild." That means she's a very nice fish. Because the Vikings, they had a lot of fishing going on around the coastal line of Denmark. And this was the basic of their way of supporting themselves and surviving. So they had the idea that you need to have good fish. And therefore, this language developed. A wonderful girl can be compared to a nice fish, and therefore a beautiful girl, even today, 2019, in Copenhagen, she is called en lækker sild, a nice fish. Well, you see, the language can survive even more than 1,000 years. But back to the question, am I a Viking or not? Well, there are certain arguments against me being a Viking. And actually, I think the conclusion of this short discussion is that I don't like to be called a Viking because I do not feel like being a Viking. And what is especially against my moral beliefs and my religion is that the Vikings, they were pagans. They didn't believe in Christ. I don't know if they believed in God, but they had their own religion called Odin and Thor. It was Viking gods. Today we are a Christian nation here in Denmark. I'm a Catholic and I like the Christian God. I like Jesus Christ and his mother, Virgin Mary. I think the Viking religion, it was maybe somehow comparable to Christianity, but not totally. They have some gods in Viking Age that could be compared to some of the Christian gods, the Christian saints being in heaven. But the Vikings, they were polytheists, probably in some kind like the Indians today. In Indian, we have Hinduism. It is a polytheist religion. And the Vikings, they were polytheists too. So therefore, I won't call myself a Viking because I'm a Christian. I'm not a polytheist. I'm a believer of the one supreme God, the Father of Jesus Christ. I'm a follower of the Trinity, the teaching of the church. And one part of the churchly teaching is that you are not allowed to kill. You're not allowed to kill other people. You're not allowed to kill your own children. Abortion is not legal in Christianity. So there is a big difference between the morality of the Viking Age and the morality of me today. In the Viking Age, if they had a child and this child was somehow disabled or not able to function in a proper way in the society, he would be left alone out in the forest, and probably he would be eaten by wolves or some other animals. This was the way of killing children during the Viking Age, because they didn't have the resources to keep these children living, and because every family had to defend themselves, support themselves, earn money for themselves, trade for themselves, go fishing, go hunting for themselves. So therefore, everyone had to have a job to work for the community and for the family. This was the basic law in the Viking Age society. And this is okay, I can accept it. But now we are living in a much more civilized and organized society. And there we have moral rules that the Vikings could not follow because they were living a much poorer life than the life we live today. So therefore, I do not want to be compared to the Vikings. I'm not a Viking, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic. But I will not be offended when you tell me that my forefathers were Vikings. That is true. I can't take my own line of descent that long back until the Viking Age, so I'm not quite sure. In Denmark, there's been a lot of people traveling in and out of our country, so we don't have a simple culture only coming from local gene pools. No, we have a culture where our genes is coming from probably all over the world. And me, Jacob Monk, I'm a mixture of genes coming from many countries. As I told you, from Norway, I have some forefathers coming from Norway. I've also have family coming from Switzerland, from southern Denmark. And probably I've also family coming from Eastern Europe. So I'm not a simple genetic living being. I'm a complex genetic living being. I don't want to be called a Viking because I don't identify with the Viking culture and the Viking morality. I want to become a Catholic, but I accept that the genes that I have in my body, they are descendants of a culture, partly descendant coming from a culture that was the dominant culture here in Denmark 1,000 years ago. and that culture was called the Viking culture. Thank you for listening.